Microchips. They power everything from your smartphone to the most advanced weapon systems. These tiny chips, less than the size of a fingernail, now hold the fate of artificial intelligence, national security and global influence in their tiny circuits. Nations are waging economic warfare over them and corporations are fighting to secure their supply chain. Simply put, they have become the single most important commodity in the modern world. If this supply chain collapses, entire industries will ground to a halt, economies will crumble, and the AI revolution would come crashing down. This isn't just a trade dispute, it's a technological arms race, a cold war with global consequences. Welcome to Chip War. A transistor is the basic building block of all electronic circuits. They act as miniature electrical circuits that can turn the current on or off, which can be represented by 1 and 0. This binary system forms the basis of all computer operations. As more transistors are combined, they form more complex circuits that can store data and perform advanced computations. But individual discrete transistors and other electrical components take up a lot of space and is expensive to manufacture. That's where the microchip comes in. A microchip, also called a computer chip, an integrated circuit or IC, is a set of electronic circuits printed on a small piece of silicon. The pattern of tiny electronic components is etched on the silicon wafer by removing material to form multi-layered lattice using a technique known as photolithography. This allows the microchip, the size of your fingernail, to contain billions of transistors, each just a few nanometers across. Soon after the microchip's invention, its advancement has been exponential. Intel co-founder Gordon Moore predicted in 1975 that the number of transistors on an integrated circuit will double once every 2 years. This has since been known as Moore's law. As a result, from 1956 to the modern day, computing power has increased more than 1 trillion fold. This exponential increase in computing power has led to some groundbreaking new technologies, such as artificial intelligence, high-speed internet, and everyday objects, from smartphones to smart cars. The supply chain for microchips is one of the world's most complex processes, and it is worth over $500 billion. The production of a single computer chip takes more than 1,000 steps and passes through international borders more than 70 times before it reaches an end customer. No country or company is self-sufficient. After research and development, semiconductor production includes 3 segments. Design, which decides how the chip should operate, creates a model of interconnected electrical components, then verifies to make sure chips will operate as expected. Fabrication begins with depositing thin material layers onto silicon wafer to form the base of the chip. Then it applies a light-sensitive coating and uses photolithography to print circuit patterns. Then etches away unwanted materials and implants ions to create transistors and connections. Assembly, testing and packaging stage is where the finished wafer is cut into separate chips, and each chip is fixed on a frame which connects the chips to the outside devices and is covered in a protective casing. The chip is also tested to make sure it operates as intended. End use involves distribution of chips for integration into products such as smartphones, computers, servers, and automobiles. These steps either occur in a single firm, an integrated device manufacturer, IDM, that designs, manufactures, and sells the chip all under one roof. Examples are Intel and Samsung. Or they're manufactured in separate firms. A fabless firm designs and sells the chip. Firms like NVIDIA, AMD, and Qualcomm. The United States dominates this sector. They then outsource fabrication services to a foundry such as Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, TSMC, which controls over 64% of the foundry market. It controls an even larger 90% of the most advanced 3nm chips used by the likes of NVIDIA. Despite not being a household name, TSMC has a near monopoly on some of the most crucial technology in the industry. making it one of the most valuable companies in the world and a dangerous choke point in the supply chain. Then ATP services are purchased from an outsourced semiconductor assembly and test firm. ATP is mainly based in countries such as Taiwan, China, while Southeast Asian countries like Singapore and Malaysia are emerging powers. Production requires several inputs. Electronic design automation. Today, chips include billions of transistors and other electrical components. To manage this complexity, chip designers use EDA software's automated design tools. Core IP. Intellectual properties related to chip designs, called core IP, consist of reusable modular portions of designs, allowing design firms to license and incorporate them in their designs. US and European companies such as Cadence, Synopsys, and ARM lead this field. Materials. Making chips require materials such as ultra-pure silicon, specialty gases, and other elements. Japan dominates this sector. Semiconductor manufacturing equipment. Specialized equipment is needed for each step of the manufacturing process. These tools include those for wafer manufacturing, photomask handling, wafer marking, ion implantation, lithography, and deposition. The United States, Japan, and the Netherlands dominate this field. But perhaps the biggest choke point in the semiconductor manufacturing is the most advanced photolithography equipment used by the likes of TSMC, which is currently only produced by the Dutch company ASML. Many of these chips, manufactured in different countries for different purposes, end up in China for assembly into their final device. China has the largest consumer electronics industry, with over 27% market share worth over $671 billion US. It also has the largest automobile industry, producing nearly a third of all vehicles. China is also a leading player in 5G and telecommunications. All of this requires advanced chips to be imported into China. It spends over $350 billion US each year doing that. This is more than it spends on oil. But more importantly, China has huge ambitions in artificial intelligence and supercomputing. Artificial intelligence has been such a promising technology that Google CEO Sundar Pichai once said that it is more of a game changer than electricity or even fire. This is not just a technology for the everyday convenience of civilians. There are deep national security implications with the development of artificial intelligence. China, as an emerging military and economic superpower, has been highly interested in developing its AI capability. Development of artificial intelligence and its subset, machine learning, depends on three elements: data, algorithms, and computing power. Making advanced AI systems has depended on having access to a large collection of data which requires ever more computing power. So, advances in AI depend on the advances of computing power. Developing the computing power to be the artificial intelligence superpower requires advanced chips. So, China requires advanced chips not only to sustain its leadership in manufacturing consumer electronics, automobiles, and telecommunication infrastructure, but also to drive the ambitions of artificial intelligence. However, China lacks the capacity to manufacture the chips it requires. This leaves China dependent on its geopolitical adversaries to purchase these chips. The United States and its allies in East and Southeast Asia, as well as in Europe, have a stranglehold in the production of semiconductors. China has managed to build impressive software for internet search, e-commerce, and online payments. Yet, all of this relies on foreign hardware and core technologies. This fact has made Chinese leadership uneasy. China needed these core technologies to catch up with US allied nations. It had plans to achieve some self-sufficiency in semiconductors with Made in China 2025. Beijing planned on reducing the share of imported chips from 75% in 2015 to 30% in 2025. By this point, China had made several attempts to bring chip manufacturing to China. The most successful of which, Semiconductor Manufacturing International Corporation (SMIC),
was founded in 2000 by Chinese-born, Taiwanese-raised, and American-trained semiconductor engineer Richard Chang. SMIC had grown to become the most successful Chinese foundry, yet it lagged behind foreign competition by several years.
So, in 2014, the big fund was launched. Investors included the Chinese Finance Ministry, the municipal governments of Beijing, Wuhan, and Shanghai, and several other state-owned firms. Beijing was going on a different path than Japan, South Korea, or Taiwan when they tried to break into the semiconductor industry. They collaborated with US firms to integrate into the semiconductor environment and to build a symbiotic relationship. But China was trying to break free from this system. In 2017, Xi Jinping emphasized this, calling on Chinese semiconductor industry to assault fortifications and storm the passes. This worried China's neighbors significantly. For South Korea, Singapore, Malaysia, and Taiwan, their economy depended significantly on microchip exports. During the 2010s, several rivalries and failures of foreign firms allowed China to gain valuable core technologies. After the Edward Snowden leak scandal, IBM lost market share in China due to suspicion of US firms. Meanwhile, its outdated power architecture was struggling against Intel chips in the data center market. To regain trust and market share, IBM shifted strategies from selling hardware to services and opened up some of their core technologies to their Chinese partners. Another US giant, AMD, was involved in a controversial deal to license the production of some modified x86 chips to Chinese firms, which successfully bypassed US regulations. British firm ARM spun out its China division, selling majority share of ARM China to Chinese investors. Being the largest market, China had many buttons to push to convince foreign firms. Faced with losing market share, foreign firms attempted to come back out on top by expanding in China. Apart from these technology transfers, several Chinese firms attempted to buy foreign firms to gain their technology. For example, Xinhua Unigroup attempted to buy stakes in TSMC and the US firm Micron, both of which were blocked by their respective governments. Meanwhile, the success of Chinese telecommunication giant Huawei was worrying the West. Starting from humble beginnings in 1987, by 2019, Huawei had built a global empire, leading the fields of telecommunication, consumer electronics, and at the forefront of smartphone development, alongside Apple and Samsung. Huawei had long been under suspicion for the stealing of intellectual property from foreign firms. The support it received from the Chinese government as tax cuts and subsidies was also concerning. Now, Huawei was leading the charge in building 5G telecommunication equipment. Amidst all of this, the event that triggered a full-blown chip war was the United States' decision to ban Huawei. In 2019, the US placed Huawei on the entity list, which restricted its access to services such as Google, Intel, and Qualcomm. Also, US allies like Australia, New Zealand, France, and Poland banned Huawei from building 5G networks within their countries. In 2020, the US banned any company using US tools or software from selling chips to Huawei. Due to the US pressure, Taiwan's TSMC and the Netherlands' ASML both blocked their services to Huawei. The restrictions placed by the first Trump administration was further tightened and carried on by the Biden administration. This, understandably, worried China. Their worst fears regarding the core technologies was now being realized. This further revitalized their efforts to achieve semiconductor self-sufficiency at all costs. While the US was choking out China with semiconductor restrictions, the COVID-19 pandemic and its aftermath resulted in another chip shortage. As more people started working from home, the demand for personal computers increased. As more of their lives were spent online, more data centers were needed. All of this resulted in a higher than ever demand for microchips in the early 2020s. Production struggled to keep up due to lockdowns and poor market predictions. The most affected sector was the relatively basic chips needed for automobiles.
This shortage prompted countries to take action. The Chips and Science Act was passed by the US Congress in 2022, allocating hundreds of billions of dollars for semiconductor and telecommunication purposes to strengthen the US supply chain and to counter China. The European Union introduced their own European Chips Act to enhance the European Union's position in the semiconductor industry. In 2022, the US further escalated the chip war by introducing even tougher restrictions on semiconductors. Many advanced chip technologies were placed on the Commerce Control List, which restricts their export. This meant that the most advanced chips, like NVIDIA's H100 and A100 chips, could no longer be exported into China. This led NVIDIA to develop a lower grade versions such as the H20 to market as their primary AI chip in China. In December 2024, just weeks before the swearing in of President Donald Trump for the second time, the Biden administration issued even more sanctions, curbing the export of many cutting-edge chip technologies to more than 140 different Chinese companies. Amidst all of this adversity, Chinese semiconductor industry was growing rapidly. In the year 2024, China started more than 30 new projects related to various sectors within the semiconductor industry. Chinese foundry SMIC has also grown to become the third largest foundry globally. Despite the US banning most cutting-edge latest chip technologies, China had no issue with access to legacy chips, which were still needed in large quantities for everyday use. And China had also managed to produce many of these chips domestically. Yet, it trails behind the US and its allies when it comes to the international semiconductor scene. From the 70% self-sufficiency set by Made in China 2025 goals, it is only expected to fulfill a little over 30% by the end of 2025. Chinese market position in the international semiconductor supply chain is also worrying. While the US contributes a 39% of the value in the semiconductor supply chain and the US allies contribute 53% together, China only managed to contribute a measly 6%. It seemed that the US and its allies had won the chip war. China seemed to be years behind the latest chip technology in the semiconductor industry. The US could sit back and relax. That was until 20th January 2025. As US President Donald Trump was being sworn in for the second time in Washington DC, in China, a little known company called DeepSeek released its new AI model DeepSeek R1, which changed everything. DeepSeek had managed to match the most advanced AI models in the world, such as OpenAI's O1 model, with a fraction of the budget and lower performance chips. DeepSeek's R1 model was reportedly made with the China-specific lower performance H800 NVIDIA chips, which were acquired before even they were banned from being exported. They reportedly used only around 2,000 of these chips, which is in great contrast to more than 16,000 chips used by leading AI companies. The model reportedly cost around $5.6 million, which is less than a tenth of the budget for Meta's new AI model. China had managed to make advanced AI models with low performance chips and less computing power because of their advancements in algorithms and architecture. It seemed that the need for advanced chips in the building of advanced AI models was now less, which meant that many US microchip companies lost value. For example, NVIDIA lost around $600 billion of market capitalization in a single day. It also meant that US export controls may have set Chinese semiconductor industry back a few years, but it had not managed to stop the advancement of Chinese AI. But this was not the only breakthrough. Chinese researchers revealed that they are close to building an EUV lithography machine. EUV lithography was one of the major roadblocks to China developing its own cutting-edge semiconductor industry. If this succeeds, Chinese foundries would soon catch up to the West. China seemed to have made an incredible comeback despite all of the adversity. What does this all mean for the future? As the U.S. China trade dispute enters a new era under the second Trump administration, tariffs are no longer just on adversarial countries like China, but also on very close US allies like Canada and Mexico. the US was able to maintain its dominant lead because of its many allies. But would the Trump administration's tariffs on allies alienate it from its semiconductor allies in East and Southeast Asia? If this happens, China would be able to forge close relationships with US allies, strengthening its position within the supply chain. Meanwhile, China's AI sector is thriving with less reliance on cutting-edge chip technologies but more on optimizing algorithms. Does this signal a shift in the semiconductor industry where raw processing power matters less? Will China's leading chip designer Huawei and leading foundry SMIC be able to catch up with global leaders Nvidia and TSMC, or will the West maintain its dominant lead? The future of semiconductors, AI and geopolitics is more uncertain than ever. If you found this breakdown useful, consider subscribing. There's a lot more to come on the intersection of tech, economics and global power. This is NNM Plus.